At 40, Eliza Whitmore had become the whispered cautionary tale of London society, the spinster who had missed her chance, the woman who dared to age without a husband's protection. But when the kingdom's most sought-after bachelor, Duke Victor Harrington, looked past the cruel gossip and saw the extraordinary woman beneath, he discovered that true beauty lies not in youth, but in wisdom, not in desperation, but in dignity, and that the most profound love often blooms in the most unexpected gardens. The autumn of 1823 found Miss Eliza Whitmore standing at the edge of yet another glittering ballroom, watching the familiar dance of courtship unfold before her with the detached observation of one who had long ago ceased to be a participant. At 40 years of age, she had become something of a fixture at London's social gatherings, not because she was welcomed, but because her presence served as a useful reminder to younger ladies of what fate awaited those who failed to secure a husband in their prime. Eliza was not unaware of the whispers that followed in her wake, the pitying glances and barely concealed smirks that greeted her appearance at every social function. She had heard herself described as "poor dear Eliza," the Whitmore spinster, and most cruelly, a cautionary tale in silken pearls. Yet she continued to attend these gatherings with a quiet dignity that both puzzled and irritated those who expected her to retreat into the shadows of spinsterhood. Standing 5 feet and 6 inches tall, with auburn hair that had begun to show threads of silver at her temples, Eliza possessed a classical beauty that had matured rather than faded with age. Her hazel eyes held depths of intelligence and compassion that few bothered to notice, and her figure, though no longer possessing the slender curves of youth, carried itself with an elegance that spoke of inner strength and self-possession. Tonight, at the Countess of Pembroke's annual ball, Eliza wore a gown of deep burgundy silk that complemented her coloring beautifully, though she knew that fashion dictated she should have chosen something more subdued, greys or browns that would announce her acceptance of her unmarried state. But Eliza had never been one to bow entirely to society's expectations, a trait that had perhaps contributed to her current circumstances. "Miss Whitmore," came a voice behind her, and Eliza turned to find Lady Margaret Thornfield approaching with the particular smile that always preceded some form of social cruelty disguised as concern. "How lovely to see you this evening. That gown is quite bold for someone of your situation." "Good evening, Lady Thornfield," Eliza replied with perfect composure. "I find that life is too short to dress as though one were already dead." Lady Thornfield's smile faltered slightly at this unexpected response. She had clearly been hoping for the kind of humble gratitude that would allow her to feel magnanimous in her condescension. "Yes, well," she said, recovering quickly, "I suppose at your age one must take whatever small pleasures one can find." "Indeed," Eliza agreed pleasantly. "I find great pleasure in good books, meaningful conversation, and the company of genuine friends. I consider myself quite fortunate in that regard." Before Lady Thornfield could formulate another barbed comment, their conversation was interrupted by a stir near the ballroom entrance. The crowd seemed to part like the Red Sea, and even from her position at the edge of the room, Eliza could see the cause of the commotion. Duke Victor Harrington had arrived. At 35, the Duke of Harrington was widely considered the most eligible bachelor in England, a status he had held for the better part of a decade, despite the determined efforts of every ambitious mother in the ton. Tall and powerfully built, with dark hair and striking green eyes, he possessed the kind of masculine beauty that made even the most sophisticated ladies lose their composure. More importantly, he was wealthy beyond imagination, held one of the oldest and most respected titles in the realm, and had thus far shown no inclination to marry anyone. Eliza watched with detached interest as the usual parade of young beauties positioned themselves strategically in his path, each hoping to be the one to finally capture his attention. She had observed this same scene countless times over the years, and it never varied in its predictability. The Duke would dance with the appropriate partners, make polite conversation, and depart without having shown particular favor to anyone. "I hear he's finally considering marriage," Lady Thornfield whispered, her earlier animosity toward Eliza temporarily forgotten in the excitement of gossip. "Lady Catherine Pemberton is said to be the front-runner, though Miss Sophia Ashford has been making quite an impression this season." Eliza nodded politely, though she felt a familiar pang of something she refused to acknowledge as envy. Not for the Duke specifically, she was far too practical to harbor romantic fantasies about a man so far above her station, but for the hope and possibility that still surrounded these young women. At 20, The world had seemed full of endless potential. At 40, she had learned to find contentment in smaller, quieter joys. "Excuse me," she murmured to Lady Thornfield. "I believe I'll step out for some air." The terrace was blissfully quiet after the noise and heat of the ballroom, and Eliza took a moment to enjoy the cool autumn breeze that stirred the carefully arranged curls at her temples. She had always preferred the outdoors to crowded social gatherings, and she allowed herself a few minutes of peaceful solitude before duty would require her to return inside. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." The voice, deep and cultured, came from behind her, and Eliza turned in surprise to find Duke Victor Harrington himself standing in the doorway to the terrace. In the moonlight, he was even more imposing than he had appeared in the ballroom, and Eliza felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. "Your Grace," she said, offering a perfectly executed curtsy. "I am Miss Eliza Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore," he repeated, moving to stand beside her at the stone balustrade. "I confess, I've been watching you this evening, and I find myself curious about something." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she wasn't sure whether it was from embarrassment or something else entirely. "Oh, and what might that be, Your Grace? You seem to be the only person in that ballroom who isn't desperately trying to capture my attention," he said with a wry smile. "I find it rather refreshing." "Perhaps because I'm the only person in that ballroom who has no illusions about capturing your attention, Your Grace," Eliza replied with characteristic honesty. "I'm 40 years old and firmly on the shelf. I'm hardly the sort of woman who would interest a man of your circumstances." Victor studied her face in the moonlight, noting the way she held herself with quiet dignity, despite the self-deprecating nature of her words. "And yet here I am, interested enough to seek you out for conversation." "Here you are indeed," Eliza agreed, though she couldn't quite hide her surprise. "Though I suspect you're simply seeking refuge from the marriage-minded misses and their ambitious mothers." "Partly," Victor admitted with refreshing honesty. "But also because you intrigue me, Miss Whitmore. There's something about you, a quality of serenity perhaps, that I find quite compelling." Eliza looked at him sharply, searching his face for signs of mockery or cruel jest, but found only genuine interest. "I fear you may be confusing resignation with serenity, Your Grace." "Are they so different?" Victor asked. "In my experience, true serenity comes only after one has made peace with life's disappointments and chosen to find joy despite them." The observation was so unexpectedly perceptive that Eliza found herself truly looking at him for the first time, seeing past the handsome facade to the intelligent man beneath. "That's a rather philosophical view for a duke, Your Grace." "Perhaps dukes are allowed to have philosophical moments," Victor said, with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Particularly when they find themselves in conversation with a woman who doesn't simper or giggle or attempt to impress them with vapid observations about the weather." "I fear I'm far too old for simpering," Eliza said dryly. "And as for impressing you, I gave up trying to impress anyone years ago. I find it's much more comfortable to simply be oneself." "And who is yourself, Miss Whitmore?" Victor asked, leaning against the balustrade and giving her his full attention. Beyond the woman society has labeled and dismissed. The question caught Eliza off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her about herself, really asked with genuine interest, that she hardly knew how to respond. I suppose I'm someone who has learned to find contentment in unexpected places." I read voraciously. "I correspond with several ladies who share my interest in social reform, and I've discovered that there's a great deal of freedom in being overlooked by society." "Social reform?" Victor's eyebrows rose with interest. "What sort of reforms?" "Education for working-class children primarily," Eliza said, warming to a subject close to her heart. "And improved conditions for women in the factories. I know it's not considered appropriate for ladies to concern themselves with such matters, but you concern yourself anyway," Victor finished. "How wonderfully subversive of you." Eliza looked at him in surprise. "You don't disapprove?" "On the contrary, I find it admirable," Victor said. "Too many people of our class are content to enjoy their privileges without considering their responsibilities. Tell me more about your work." For the next half hour, Eliza found herself engaged in the most stimulating conversation she had enjoyed in years. Victor listened with genuine interest as she described her correspondence with reformers in Manchester and Birmingham, her efforts to raise funds for schools in London's poorest districts, and her growing conviction that society's treatment of women, particularly unmarried women, was both cruel and wasteful. You speak with great passion about these causes, Victor observed. Have you considered that your own experiences might give you unique insights into the challenges faced by women who don't conform to society's expectations? I suppose they might, Eliza said slowly. I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms. Perhaps you should, Victor said. There's power in understanding born of experience, Miss Whitmore. Your voice might carry more weight than you realize. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of other guests seeking the cooler air of the terrace. Victor straightened, and Eliza felt the spell of their conversation begin to break. I should return inside, she said, though she was reluctant to end their remarkable exchange. As should I, Victor agreed. But I hope we might continue our conversation at some future occasion, Miss Whitmore. I would like that very much, Your Grace, Eliza said, and was surprised to realize how much she meant it. As they walked back toward the ballroom together, Eliza was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She could practically feel the speculation crackling through the air like electricity, and she knew that by tomorrow morning, all of London society would be buzzing with questions about why the Duke of Harrington had spent nearly an hour in private conversation with the notorious spinster Eliza Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, Victor said quietly as they reached the ballroom entrance, might I call upon you tomorrow afternoon? I find myself eager to hear more of your thoughts on social reform. Eliza's heart skipped a beat, though she tried to maintain her composure. I would be honored, Your Grace, though I fear such a visit might cause talk. Let them talk, Victor said with a dismissive wave of his hand. I've never allowed society's opinions to dictate my actions, and I don't intend to start now. As Victor moved away to fulfill his social obligations, Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, hardly able to believe what had just transpired. The most eligible man in England had not only sought her out for conversation, but had requested permission to call upon her. It was so far beyond anything she had ever dared to imagine that she wondered if she might be dreaming. Well, well, came a familiar voice, and Eliza turned to find Lady Thornfield at her elbow, eyes bright with malicious curiosity. That was quite an extended tête-à-tête with His Grace. Whatever could you have found to discuss for so long? Books, Eliza said simply, knowing that the truth would be far more damaging to Lady Thornfield's gossip than any elaborate fabrication. We discovered a mutual interest in literature. Literature, Lady Thornfield repeated, clearly disappointed by such a mundane explanation. How educational. As Eliza made her way through the remainder of the evening, she was acutely aware of the attention focused upon her. Some of the looks were curious, others speculative, and more than a few were openly hostile. She had inadvertently committed the cardinal sin of attracting the Duke's attention when younger, more suitable ladies had failed to do so, and she knew she would pay a price for that transgression. But for the first time in years, Eliza found that she didn't care what society thought. The conversation with Victor had awakened something in her that she had thought long dead, a sense of possibility, of worth beyond the narrow confines of marriage and motherhood that society insisted were a woman's only sources of value. As her carriage carried her home through the quiet streets of London, Eliza allowed herself to hope that tomorrow's visit might lead to something more than polite conversation, not romance. She was far too practical to believe that a duke would seriously consider a 40-year-old spinster as anything more than an interesting diversion. But perhaps friendship, perhaps the chance to be seen and valued for who she truly was, rather than dismissed for who she had failed to become. It was more than she had dared to hope for in years, and as she prepared for bed in her modest but comfortable home, Eliza found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt since she was a young woman full of dreams and possibilities. The next afternoon found Eliza in a state of nervous anticipation that she hadn't experienced in decades. She had changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple but elegant gown of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had spent an embarrassing amount of time arranging and rearranging the flowers in her modest drawing room. At precisely 3 o'clock, her housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, announced the arrival of the Duke of Harrington, and Eliza felt her heart begin to race in a way that seemed absurd for a woman of her age and experience. "Your Grace," she said, rising to greet him as he entered her drawing room. "Welcome to my home." "Miss Whitmore," Victor replied, offering a bow that was perfectly correct, but somehow warmer than mere politeness required. "Thank you for receiving me." As he settled into the chair she indicated, Eliza found herself studying him with new eyes. In the daylight streaming through her windows, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who laughed often, and the slight silver threading through his dark hair that suggested he was closer to 40 than 30. Somehow, these small signs of maturity made him seem more approachable, less like the untouchable paragon society painted him to be. "I took the liberty of bringing you something," Victor said, producing a leather-bound volume from his coat. "It's a collection of essays on social reform by various writers. I thought you might find it interesting." Eliza accepted the book with genuine pleasure, running her fingers over the fine leather binding. "How thoughtful of you, Your Grace. I shall treasure it." "I hope you'll find it useful as well as treasured," Victor said. "Several of the essays deal specifically with women's education and employment opportunities. I'd be very interested in your thoughts on them." For the next 2 hours, they talked with the same ease and intellectual stimulation that had marked their conversation the previous evening. Victor proved to be remarkably well informed about social issues, and Eliza was delighted to discover that his interest in reform was genuine rather than merely fashionable. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Victor said, as their conversation began to wind down, "about the power of experience in understanding social problems. Have you ever considered writing about your own observations? Your perspective as an unmarried woman navigating society's expectations might be quite valuable." Eliza felt a flush of pleasure at the suggestion. "I've kept journals for years, but I never thought anyone else might be interested in my scribblings." "I suspect your scribblings might be more insightful than you realize," Victor said. "Would you consider sharing some of them with me? I'd be honored to read your thoughts." Yes, I think I would like that," Eliza said, surprised by her own boldness. "Though I warn you, I can be quite opinionated when it comes to society's treatment of women." "I'm counting on it," Victor said with a smile that made Eliza's heart skip a beat. As he prepared to leave, Victor paused at the door. "Miss Whitmore, I hope you won't think me too forward, but I wonder if you might join me for a drive in the park tomorrow afternoon. I find myself eager to continue our conversations, and I think you might enjoy the fresh air." Eliza stared at him in amazement. A drive in the park was a public declaration of interest, the sort of attention that would set tongues wagging throughout London society. "Your Grace, I'm not sure that would be wise. People will talk, and I fear the speculation might be uncomfortable for you." "Let me worry about the speculation," Victor said firmly. "The question is whether you would enjoy the drive." "I would enjoy it very much," Eliza admitted. "Then it's settled," Victor said. "I'll call for you at 4 o'clock. After he left, Eliza sank into her chair, hardly able to believe what was happening. The Duke of Harrington, the most sought-after bachelor in England, was courting her. There was no other word for it, no matter how improbable it seemed. That evening she received an unexpected visitor in the form of her younger sister, Charlotte, who had married well and moved in the highest circles of society. "Eliza," Charlotte said without preamble as she swept into the drawing room, "what on earth are you thinking? The entire town is buzzing with talk about your conversation with the Duke last night, and now I hear he's called upon you this afternoon. Have you completely taken leave of your senses?" "Good evening to you too, Charlotte," Eliza said mildly. "Would you care for tea?" "This is not a time for pleasantries," Charlotte said, settling herself in the chair Victor had occupied earlier. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? They're suggesting that you've somehow ensnared the Duke with feminine wiles or some such nonsense. The damage to your reputation could be irreparable." "My reputation as a spinster, you mean?" Eliza asked with amusement. "I hardly think it could sink much lower." "This is not amusing, Eliza," Charlotte said sternly. "You're 40 years old. You cannot seriously believe that a man like the Duke of Harrington has romantic intentions toward you." The words stung, though Eliza tried not to show it. "And why not? Because I'm too old? Too plain? Too far beneath his station?" "Because you're being practical," Charlotte said, her tone softening slightly. "You've always been the practical one, Eliza. Don't let a few moments of attention from a handsome duke turn your head. He's probably just amusing himself, and when he tires of the novelty, you'll be left to face the consequences." "Perhaps," Eliza said quietly, "but perhaps not. Perhaps there are men in this world capable of seeing value in a woman beyond her youth and beauty and marriageability." "Oh, Eliza," Charlotte sighed. "I don't want to see you hurt. You've built a good life for yourself, a respectable life. Don't throw it away chasing impossible dreams." After Charlotte left, Eliza sat alone in her drawing room, her sister's words echoing in her mind. Was she being foolish? Was she allowing herself to hope for something that could never be? The practical part of her mind, the part that had learned to accept disappointment and find contentment in smaller joys, urged her to be cautious. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for so long she had almost forgotten its existence, whispered that perhaps it was time to stop being quite so practical. Perhaps it was time to allow herself to hope, to dream, to believe that happiness might still be possible even at 40. The next afternoon, as she prepared for her drive with Victor, Eliza made a conscious decision to silence the voice of caution and listen instead to the voice of possibility. Whatever came of this unexpected courtship, she would not look back with regret that she had been too afraid to embrace it. When Victor arrived with his elegant curricle, Eliza was struck anew by his handsome appearance and easy confidence. He handed her up into the vehicle with the same courtesy he might have shown a young debutante, and as they set off for Hyde Park, Eliza felt a thrill of excitement that had nothing to do with the brisk autumn air. "You look lovely this afternoon, Miss Whitmore," Victor said, as they joined the fashionable parade of carriages in the park. "That shade of green suits you beautifully." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eliza replied, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed their progress. "I fear we're causing quite a sensation." "Good," Victor said with satisfaction. It's about time London society had something genuinely interesting to discuss. As they drove, Victor pointed out various landmarks and shared amusing anecdotes about the other occupants of the park. But Eliza found herself only half listening. She was too busy marveling at the surreal nature of her situation. She, Eliza Whitmore, the confirmed spinster, was being publicly courted by the Duke of Harrington. "You're very quiet," Victor observed as they paused near the Serpentine. "Are you regretting your decision to accompany me?" "Not at all," Eliza said quickly. "I'm simply adjusting to the novelty of being the center of attention. It's been many years since anyone found me worthy of speculation." "Then they haven't been looking hard enough," Victor said seriously. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Whitmore. I hope you know that." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes at the simple sincerity in his voice. "I'm beginning to believe you might actually mean that." "I do mean it," Victor said, reaching over to cover her gloved hand with his own. Every word. The gesture was small, barely noticeable to casual observers, but to Eliza it felt momentous. When was the last time a man had touched her with such gentle affection? When was the last time anyone had looked at her with such warmth and admiration? As they completed their circuit of the park and headed back toward her home, Eliza found herself reluctant for the afternoon to end. In Victor's company, she felt like a different person, not the overlooked spinster society saw, but a woman of worth and intelligence, deserving of attention and respect. "Miss Whitmore," Victor said as he handed her down from the curricle, "I hope you'll allow me to call upon you again soon, perhaps tomorrow evening? I understand you enjoy reading, and I thought you might like to attend a lecture at the Royal Institution with me." Eliza's breath caught. A public evening engagement was an even more significant declaration than an afternoon drive. "Your Grace, are you certain? Such an outing would be seen as what it is," Victor said firmly. "A gentleman escorting a lady to an intellectual event because he values her company and her conversation. If society chooses to read more into it than that, so be it." "Then yes," Eliza said, her heart racing with excitement and terror in equal measure. "I would be delighted to accompany you." As Victor's curricle disappeared around the corner, Eliza stood on her doorstep for a moment, hardly able to believe that her quiet, predictable life had been so completely transformed in the space of 2 days. Whatever the future held, she was determined to embrace this unexpected chance at happiness with both hands. The lecture at the Royal Institution proved to be a revelation in more ways than one. As Eliza sat beside Victor in the crowded auditorium, listening to a distinguished professor discuss the latest developments in natural philosophy, she was acutely aware of the whispered conversations and pointed stares directed their way. But for the first time in her life, she found that she didn't care what society thought. The intellectual stimulation of the lecture, combined with Victor's obvious pleasure in her company, made her feel more alive than she had in years. "What did you think of Professor Hartwell's theories about electricity?" Victor asked, as they made their way out of the building at the lecture's conclusion. "Fascinating, though I confess I found his dismissal of Mrs. Marset's work rather short-sighted," Eliza replied. "Her Conversations on Natural Philosophy has done more to make scientific concepts accessible to general readers than any of his dry academic papers." Victor smiled with obvious delight. "I couldn't agree more. It's refreshing to meet someone who appreciates both scientific rigor and the importance of education for all classes of society." As they waited for Victor's carriage, Eliza noticed a group of young ladies nearby whispering behind their fans while shooting venomous glances in her direction. Among them was Miss Sophia Ashford, widely considered one of the season's greatest beauties and a leading candidate for Victor's hand. "Your Grace," Miss Ashford said, approaching with the confidence of youth and beauty, "what a surprise to see you here this evening. I wouldn't have thought scientific lectures were quite your usual entertainment." "On the contrary, Miss Ashford," Victor replied coolly, "I find intellectual pursuits far more engaging than most social diversions. Miss Whitmore was kind enough to accompany me, and I've greatly enjoyed her insights into the evening's presentation." Miss Ashford's smile became slightly strained as she turned her attention to Eliza. "Miss Whitmore, how educational for you. Though I suppose at your age, one must find entertainment wherever one can." The comment was designed to wound, and Eliza felt the familiar sting of society's casual cruelty. But before she could respond, Victor stepped forward, his expression cold with displeasure. "Miss Ashford," he said in a voice that could have frozen champagne, "I'm afraid I must disagree with your assessment. Miss Whitmore's company is not merely educational. It's delightful, stimulating, and infinitely preferable to that of individuals who mistake youth for wisdom or beauty for substance." Miss Ashford's face flushed scarlet at the public rebuke, and she retreated to her companions with obvious humiliation. Eliza stared at Victor in amazement, hardly able to believe that he had so publicly defended her honor. "You didn't need to do that," she said quietly as his carriage arrived. "Yes, I did," Victor replied firmly as he handed her up into the vehicle. "I won't stand by and watch anyone treat you with disrespect, Miss Whitmore. You deserve far better than the petty cruelties of small minds." As they drove through the lamp-lit streets of London, Eliza found herself studying Victor's profile in the flickering light. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why what?" Victor asked, turning to meet her gaze. "Why me? Why now? You could have your pick of any young lady in London, beautiful, wealthy, well-connected women who would bring you everything society says a wife should offer. Instead, you're here with me, defending my honor and risking your own reputation. I don't understand it." Victor was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and serious. "Do you know what my life has been like for the past 15 years, Miss Whitmore? Every social gathering I attend, every conversation I have, every smile directed my way, all of it calculated to capture my interest, to secure my proposal, to claim my title and fortune. I've been hunted, pursued, flattered, and manipulated by every ambitious family in England." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "And through it all, I've been profoundly lonely. Surrounded by people who wanted to possess me, but had no interest in knowing me. Until I met you." "I'm not sure I understand," Eliza said softly. "You're the first woman I've met in years who doesn't want anything from me," Victor explained. "You don't simper or flatter or try to impress me with vapid conversation. You speak your mind. You challenge my thoughts. You treat me like a human being rather than a prize to be won. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" Eliza felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I never thought of it that way. And that's exactly why I find you so extraordinary," Victor said, reaching over to take her hand. "You have no idea of your own worth, do you? You've allowed society to convince you that your value lies in what you've failed to achieve rather than in what you've accomplished." "What have I accomplished?" Eliza asked with a bitter laugh. "I'm 40 years old, unmarried, with no children and no particular talents or achievements to my name." "You've accomplished something far more valuable than marriage or motherhood," Victor said seriously. "You've maintained your integrity, your intelligence, and your compassion in the face of society's attempts to diminish you. You've used your independence to pursue causes you believe in, to educate yourself, to become a woman of substance and character. That's not failure, Miss Whitmore. That's triumph." By the time they reached her home, Eliza was struggling to contain her emotions. Victor's words had touched something deep within her, a part of herself she had learned to protect and hide from the world's casual cruelties. "Miss Whitmore," Victor said as he prepared to hand her down from the carriage, "I hope you know that my interest in you is entirely serious. I'm not amusing myself with a spinster for lack of better entertainment. I'm courting you because I believe you might be the woman I've been waiting for my entire life." Eliza stared at him in shock. "Courting me? Your Grace, surely you can't be serious. The difference in our stations alone means nothing to me Victor interrupted. "You're the daughter of a gentleman, well-educated and well-bred. Your family may not be as wealthy or titled as others, but your character is worth more than all the dowries in England." "But I'm 40 years old," Eliza protested. "Past the age of childbearing, past the age of what? Of love? Of happiness? Of being valued for who you are rather than what you can provide." Victor's voice was passionate, intense. "Miss Whitmore, Eliza, if you'll permit me the familiarity, I don't want a broodmare or a decorative wife to grace my dinner table. I want a partner, a companion, a woman who can challenge my mind and touch my heart. I want you." Eliza felt as though the world had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about herself, about her place in the world, about what was possible for a woman of her age and circumstances, was being turned upside down by this remarkable man's words. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll consider it," Victor said gently. "Say you'll allow me to continue courting you, to prove that my feelings are genuine and lasting. Say you'll give us a chance to see what we might become together." "Yes," Eliza said, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Yes, I'll consider it. I'll give us a chance." Victor's smile was radiant with joy. "Thank you," he said simply. "You won't regret it, I promise you that." As Eliza prepared for bed that night, she felt as though she were living in a dream. The most eligible bachelor in England had just declared his intention to court her, not as a diversion or an amusement, but as a serious candidate for marriage. It was so far beyond anything she had ever dared to imagine that she could hardly believe it was real. But as she lay in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, Eliza found herself thinking not about the impossibility of her situation, but about the possibilities it presented. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to dream of a future that included love, partnership, and the kind of happiness she had long ago convinced herself was not meant for women like her. The next morning brought a flood of visitors, all eager to discuss the previous evening's events. Word of Victor's public defense of Eliza had spread through society like wildfire, and everyone wanted to know what it meant for the Duke's matrimonial intentions. "My dear Eliza," said Mrs. Pemberton, her elderly neighbour, "you must tell me everything. Is it true that the Duke publicly cut Miss Ashford in your defence? The whole town is talking about it." "His Grace was merely being polite," Eliza said diplomatically, though her heart warmed at the memory of Victor's fierce protection. "Polite?" Mrs. Pemberton laughed. "My dear, dukes don't risk social censure for the sake of politeness. Mark my words, that young man has serious intentions toward you." Similar conversations continued throughout the day, and by evening, Eliza was exhausted from the constant speculation and analysis of her relationship with Victor. She was grateful when her housekeeper announced that she had a visitor, until she learned that the visitor was Lady Catherine Pemberton, one of the most formidable matrons in London society and the mother of Miss Sophia Ashford's closest friend. "Miss Whitmore," Lady Catherine said without preamble, as she settled herself in Eliza's drawing room like a general preparing for battle, "I think we need to have a frank conversation about your recent association with the Duke of Harrington." "I'm not sure what you mean, Lady Catherine," Eliza replied carefully. "Don't play coy with me, my dear," Lady Catherine said with a cold smile. "The entire ton is buzzing with speculation about the Duke's sudden interest in you. Now, I'm sure you're flattered by his attention, but surely you must realize that nothing serious can come of it." "Must I?" Eliza asked, her spine stiffening at the woman's condescending tone. "Of course you must," Lady Catherine said impatiently. "You're a sensible woman, Miss Whitmore. You know as well as I do that men of the Duke's station don't marry women of your circumstances. Oh, he may be amusing himself with your conversation for now, but when it comes time to choose a wife, he'll select someone young, beautiful, and capable of providing him with heirs." Each word was like a knife thrust, designed to wound and diminish. But instead of the crushing despair Eliza might have felt a week ago, she found herself growing angry at Lady Catherine's casual cruelty. "And you've come here to tell me this because," Eliza asked with deceptive calm. "Because I'm concerned about you, my dear," Lady Catherine said with false sweetness. "I'd hate to see you make a fool of yourself chasing after something that can never be. Far better to end this, whatever it is, now, before you're publicly humiliated when the Duke inevitably chooses a more suitable bride." "How kind of you to be so concerned about my welfare," Eliza said dryly. though I can't help but wonder if your concern might be motivated by something other than pure altruism. Perhaps the desire to clear the field for one of your own protégés." Lady Catherine's mask slipped slightly, revealing the calculating woman beneath. "I'm simply being realistic, Miss Whitmore. The Duke may be temporarily intrigued by your novelty, but novelty wears off. Youth and beauty, on the other hand, are timeless advantages." "Are they?" Eliza asked, rising from her chair with newfound confidence. "Because it seems to me that youth and beauty are precisely what the Duke has been surrounded by for years without choosing any of those supposedly advantageous young ladies. Perhaps he's looking for something different. Perhaps he values qualities that can't be found in the marriage mart." "You're deluding yourself," Lady Catherine said sharply. "And when reality sets in, you'll be left with nothing but humiliation and regret." "Perhaps," Eliza agreed calmly, "but I'd rather risk humiliation pursuing happiness than accept defeat without even trying. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have correspondence to attend to." Lady Catherine left in a huff, clearly frustrated by her failure to intimidate Eliza into withdrawing from Victor's attentions. As the door closed behind her, Eliza felt a surge of pride in her own courage. For the first time in her life, she had stood up to society's bullying and refused to be diminished by their narrow expectations. That evening, as she sat in her drawing room reading the book Victor had given her, Eliza reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. She was no longer the resigned spinster who had accepted society's verdict on her worth. She was a woman discovering her own strength, her own value, and her own capacity for happiness. Whatever the future held, she was determined to face it with courage and dignity. And if that future included the love of an extraordinary man who saw her true worth, then she would embrace it with all her heart. The transformation. Over the following weeks, Victor's courtship of Eliza became the talk of London society. He called upon her regularly, escorted her to lectures and concerts, and was seen driving with her in the park with such frequency that even the most skeptical observers began to accept that his interest was genuine and serious. For Eliza, each day brought new revelations about both Victor and herself. She discovered that beneath his ducal dignity lay a man of surprising humor and warmth, someone who could make her laugh until her sides ached, and who listened to her opinions with the respect she had never received from anyone else. "I've been thinking about your suggestion that I write about my experiences," Eliza said one afternoon as they walked through the gardens of his London mansion. "I've started putting together some essays about the challenges faced by unmarried women in society." "I'd be honored to read them," Victor said immediately. "Have you considered submitting them for publication? There are several progressive journals that might be interested in such perspectives." "Publication?" Eliza laughed. "Victor, no respectable journal would publish the writings of a spinster, and certainly not under my own name." "Why not?" Victor asked seriously. "Your insights are valuable, your writing is eloquent, and your perspective is unique. The fact that you're unmarried doesn't diminish the worth of your thoughts. If anything, it gives them additional authenticity." It was conversations like this that made Eliza realize how profoundly Victor was changing her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Under his encouragement, she began to see her unmarried status not as a failure, but as a source of independence and insight. "You make me feel as though I could do anything," she confided to him one evening as they sat together in her drawing room, "as though my age and circumstances are advantages rather than limitations." "Because they are," Victor said simply. "You've had 40 years to develop your character, your intelligence, your understanding of the world. You know who you are in a way that most 20-year-old debutantes never will. That's not a limitation, that's a gift." But their growing closeness was not without its challenges. The more public their courtship became, the more vicious the gossip grew. Eliza found herself the target of increasingly cruel comments and social slights as society struggled to understand and accept Victor's choice. "Miss Whitmore," said Lady Thornfield at a musical evening they both attended, "you must be so grateful for the Duke's charitable attention. It's quite generous of him to take an interest in someone of your situation." "I prefer to think of it as mutual appreciation rather than charity," Eliza replied with dignity. "The Duke and I share many interests and values." "How fortunate for you," Lady Thornfield said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "though I do hope you're not reading too much into his kindness. Men of his station often develop temporary fascinations with unusual companions." The comment stung, but Eliza had learned to armor herself against such attacks. Time will tell, won't it? She said pleasantly. In the meantime, I'm content to enjoy his friendship and companionship. Victor, who had overheard the exchange, appeared at Eliza's side with a thunderous expression. Lady Thornfield, he said coldly, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Miss Whitmore. I feel compelled to correct any misunderstanding about the nature of my feelings. My regard for Miss Whitmore is neither charitable nor temporary. It is profound, genuine, and permanent. Lady Thornfield paled at the rebuke, but Victor wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room, I would consider it a great favor if you would spread the word that any insult directed toward Miss Whitmore will be considered a personal affront to me. I trust that message will be clearly understood. The room fell completely silent as Victor's words sank in. He had just publicly declared his protection of Eliza in terms that left no doubt about the seriousness of his intentions. It was as good as an announcement of engagement, and everyone present knew it. As they left the musical evening together, Eliza was still reeling from Victor's public declaration. You've just announced to all of London that you intend to marry me, she said, as they settled into his carriage. Have I? Victor asked with a smile. How presumptuous of me. I haven't even proposed yet. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. Haven't you? No, Victor said seriously, taking her hands in his. When I propose to you, Eliza, it will be properly done, with all the romance and ceremony you deserve. Tonight was simply a warning to society that they will treat you with respect or answer to me. And when might this proper proposal occur? Eliza asked, hardly daring to breathe. Soon, Victor promised, bringing her gloved hands to his lips. Very soon. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and nervousness. Eliza found herself jumping at every knock on her door, wondering if this would be the moment Victor came to make his formal proposal. She had already decided what her answer would be. How could she refuse the man who had shown her that love and happiness were still possible, even at 40? The proposal, when it came, was everything she could have hoped for and more. Victor arrived on a sunny Thursday afternoon, dressed in his finest clothes and carrying a bouquet of white roses, her favorite flowers, which he had somehow remembered from a casual comment she had made weeks earlier. Miss Whitmore, he said formally as her housekeeper showed him into the drawing room, I wonder if I might speak with you privately on a matter of some importance. Of course, Your Grace, Eliza replied, her heart racing as she dismissed her housekeeper and closed the door. Victor moved to stand before her, and for a moment the confident duke she had come to know seemed almost nervous. Eliza, he began, then stopped and shook his head. No, this isn't how I planned to do this. To her amazement, he dropped to one knee before her, taking her hands in his and looking up at her with such love and tenderness that she felt tears begin to flow down her cheeks. Eliza Whitmore, he said, his voice strong and clear, you have transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to be truly known and valued, to find a partner who challenges my mind and touches my heart. I love your intelligence, your compassion, your strength, and your beautiful soul. I love the woman you are, not the woman society thinks you should be. He paused, reaching into his coat to withdraw a ring box. I know that our courtship has been unconventional, and I know that society will question my choice, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Eliza, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Through her tears, Eliza saw the ring he held, a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. But more beautiful than any jewel was the expression of love and hope on Victor's face as he waited for her answer. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Victor, yes. I love you so much, and I can't believe this is really happening. Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, spinning her around the room as she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he finally set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that made her forget everything else in the world. I love you, Eliza, he murmured against her lips. My darling, wonderful, extraordinary Eliza. I love you too, she replied, marveling at how natural the words felt. I never thought I would say those words to anyone, and now I can't imagine my life without you. As they held each other in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows, Eliza reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks ago, she had been society's forgotten spinster, resigned to a life of quiet solitude. Now she was engaged to the most sought-after man in England, a man who loved her not despite her age and circumstances, but because of the woman those experiences had shaped her to become. "When shall we be married?" Victor asked as they settled together on her sofa, Eliza's hand resting in his as they both admired her new ring. "Soon," Eliza said, echoing his earlier promise. "I've waited 40 years for this happiness. I don't want to wait much longer." "Neither do I," Victor agreed, bringing her hand to his lips once more. "Neither do I." The wedding of the century. The announcement of the Duke of Harrington's engagement to Miss Eliza Whitmore sent shockwaves through London society that reverberated for weeks. Never in living memory had such an eligible bachelor chosen such an unlikely bride, and the Tuns struggled to understand and accept Victor's choice. Some whispered that Eliza must have somehow ensnared him with feminine wiles or dark arts. Others suggested that Victor had suffered some sort of mental breakdown that affected his judgment. A few more charitable souls proposed that it was simply an elaborate jest that had gone too far. But Victor's obvious happiness and Eliza's quiet dignity gradually began to win over even the most skeptical observers. When they appeared together at social gatherings, it was impossible to miss the genuine affection between them, the way Victor's eyes lit up when Eliza spoke, or the way she bloomed under his attention and protection. "I must admit," confided the Duchess of Marlborough to her closest friend, "I was prepared to disapprove of the match entirely, but seeing them together, there's something quite beautiful about it. He looks at her as though she's the most precious thing in the world." "And she's not at all what I expected," her friend replied. "I thought she would be grasping or desperate, but she's remarkably composed and dignified. If anything, she seems almost surprised by her good fortune." Indeed, Eliza was still adjusting to her transformed circumstances. Overnight, she had gone from being society's cautionary tale to being one of its most celebrated figures. Invitations poured in from hostesses who had previously overlooked her, and she found herself the center of attention wherever she went. "It's rather overwhelming," she confessed to Victor one evening as they attended yet another social gathering in their honor. "I'm not sure I'll ever grow accustomed to being the focus of so much attention." "You're handling it beautifully," Victor assured her. "And remember, after we're married, we can spend most of our time at Harrington Hall. Country life is much more peaceful than London society." The mention of their future home sent a thrill of excitement through Eliza. Harrington Hall was Victor's principal estate, a magnificent property in Derbyshire that she had yet to visit, but which Victor described with obvious love and pride. "Tell me more about it," she said as they danced together, oblivious to the watching eyes around them. "It's beautiful," Victor said, his voice warm with affection. "Rolling hills, ancient forests, gardens that my grandmother designed. The house itself is Elizabethan, with modern improvements for comfort. I think you'll love it, Eliza. It will be a perfect place for us to begin our married life." "And your tenants?" Eliza asked, thinking of her growing interest in social reform. "Are they well cared for?" "They are," Victor confirmed, "but I suspect they'll benefit greatly from your attention. You have such a gift for seeing what needs to be done and finding practical solutions." As their wedding day approached, Eliza found herself caught between excitement and nervousness. The ceremony was to be held at St. George's, Hanover Square, the most fashionable church in London, and the guest list read like a directory of the British aristocracy. It would be the social event of the season, and Eliza sometimes felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. "Are you having second thoughts?" Charlotte asked, as she helped Eliza with the final fittings for her wedding gown. Her sister had been one of the first to congratulate her on the engagement, though Eliza suspected it had more to do with the social advantages of being connected to a duke than with genuine happiness for her sister's good fortune. "Not about marrying Victor," Eliza said firmly. "Never about that. But sometimes I wonder if I'm truly ready to be a duchess. The responsibilities, the expectations." "You'll be wonderful," Charlotte assured her. "You've always been the strongest of us, Eliza. If anyone can handle the demands of such a position, it's you." The wedding gown itself was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. Made of ivory silk with delicate lace trim, it was designed to flatter Eliza's mature figure while maintaining the dignity appropriate to her age and station. Rather than the elaborate confection that might suit a young bride, it was a gown that spoke of sophisticated beauty and quiet confidence. "You look beautiful," the seamstress said as she made the final adjustments. "His Grace is a very fortunate man." 2 days before the wedding, Eliza received an unexpected visitor. Lady Catherine Pemberton, the same woman who had tried to discourage her courtship with Victor, arrived at her door with an expression that suggested she had swallowed something particularly unpleasant. "Miss Whitmore," she said stiffly, as she was shown into the drawing room, "I've come to offer my congratulations on your upcoming marriage." "How kind of you, Lady Catherine," Eliza replied graciously, though she was puzzled by the woman's obvious discomfort. "Please, won't you sit down?" Lady Catherine perched on the edge of a chair, as though she might need to flee at any moment. "I must confess, Miss Whitmore, that I owe you an apology. When I came here weeks ago to discourage your association with the Duke, I believed I was acting in everyone's best interests." "And now?" Eliza asked gently. "Now I see that I was wrong," Lady Catherine admitted with obvious difficulty. "The Duke's happiness is evident to anyone with eyes to see, and you have conducted yourself with such dignity throughout this entire courtship that even your harshest critics have been forced to acknowledge your worth." Eliza felt a surge of compassion for the older woman, recognizing the courage it must have taken to make such an admission. "Thank you for saying so, Lady Catherine. I know our match has been unconventional." "Unconventional, yes, but not inappropriate," Lady Catherine said firmly. "I've watched you these past weeks, Miss Whitmore, and I've seen how you've handled the attention, the gossip, the challenges. You've never once responded with malice or pettiness, even when others have been cruel. That speaks to a character that will serve you well as a duchess." After Lady Catherine left, Eliza reflected on how much had changed, not just in her own circumstances, but in how others perceived her. The woman who had once been dismissed as a pathetic spinster was now being praised for her dignity and character. It was a transformation that went far deeper than her change in marital status. The evening before her wedding, Victor came to call for what would be their last private conversation as an unmarried couple. They sat together in her drawing room, hands clasped, both marveling at how far they had come. "Are you nervous?" Victor asked, studying her face in the lamplight. "Terrified," Eliza admitted with a laugh. "Not about marrying you. That's the one thing I'm absolutely certain about. But about everything else. Being a duchess, living up to expectations, not disappointing you." "Eliza," Victor said seriously, lifting her chin so she had to meet his eyes, "you could never disappoint me. You're already everything I could want in a wife. Intelligent, compassionate, strong, beautiful. The title of Duchess is just a formality. You've been the woman of my heart since the moment we met." "I love you so much," Eliza whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." "It's real," Victor assured her, sealing the promise with a gentle kiss. "Tomorrow, you'll be my wife, and we'll begin the rest of our lives together." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as though even the weather was celebrating their union. Eliza woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement as her household bustled with preparations. Charlotte arrived with their mother, who had travelled from the country for the ceremony. Mrs. Whitmore was a gentle woman who had always worried about her eldest daughter's unmarried state, and her joy at Eliza's unexpected happiness was evident in every word and gesture. "My dear girl," she said, embracing Eliza carefully so as not to disturb her hair, "I'm so proud of you, and so happy. The Duke is a wonderful man. Anyone can see how much he adores you." "Thank you, Mama," Eliza said, feeling like a young girl again under her mother's loving attention. "I know this isn't the marriage you expected for me, but—" "It's better," Mrs. Whitmore interrupted firmly. "It's a marriage based on love and respect, which is worth more than all the youthful beauty in the world." As the time for the ceremony approached, Eliza found herself surprisingly calm. All the nervousness of the past weeks had crystallized into a sense of rightness, of destiny fulfilled. She was about to marry the man she loved, a man who saw her true worth and valued her for exactly who she was. The carriage ride to St. George's passed in a blur of well-wishers lining the streets and flower petals thrown by enthusiastic onlookers. Word of the unusual love story had captured the public imagination, and Londoners had turned out in droves to witness the wedding of the century. "Look at them all," Charlotte marveled as they approached the church. "You'd think it was a royal wedding." "In a way it is," Mrs. Whitmore said softly. "It's the wedding of two people who found love against all odds. That's something worth celebrating." Inside the church, Eliza was amazed by the sea of faces turned toward her as she walked down the aisle. Every pew was filled with the cream of London society, all gathered to witness her marriage to Victor. But she had eyes only for the man waiting for her at the altar. Victor stood tall and magnificent in his formal wedding attire, his dark hair gleaming in the light from the stained glass windows. When their eyes met, his face lit up with such joy and love that Eliza felt her own heart soar in response. As she reached his side and placed her hand in his, Eliza felt a profound sense of completion. This was where she belonged, beside this extraordinary man who had seen past society's labels to the woman beneath. "Dearly beloved," the Archbishop began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church, "we are gathered together here in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony passed like a dream, each word of the traditional service taking on new meaning as Eliza and Victor pledged their lives to each other. When Victor slipped the wedding ring onto her finger, his hands were steady and sure, his voice clear and strong as he promised to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. "I, Eliza, take thee, Victor, to be my wedded husband," she responded, her own voice ringing with conviction, "to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part." When the Archbishop finally pronounced them husband and wife, Victor's kiss was tender and reverent, a seal upon the vows they had just exchanged. The congregation erupted in applause, and Eliza felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she realized that she was now the Duchess of Harrington, wife to the man she loved more than life itself. The wedding breakfast was a magnificent affair, held at Harrington House with its grand ballroom decorated with thousands of white roses and trailing ivy. As Eliza and Victor moved through the receiving line, accepting congratulations from their guests, she was struck by the genuine warmth and approval she saw in most faces. "Your Grace," said the Duke of Wellington, bowing over her hand with courtly grace, "may I say that Harrington is the most fortunate of men? I've had the pleasure of observing your courtship, and I've never seen a couple more perfectly suited to each other." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eliza replied, still marveling at being addressed by her new title. "You're very kind." "Not kind, truthful," Wellington said with a smile. "Love like yours is rare and precious. Treasure it." As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Eliza found herself alone with Victor for the first time as his wife. They stood together on the terrace of Harrington House, looking out over the moonlit gardens, both still somewhat dazed by the magnitude of the day. "How do you feel, Your Grace?" Victor asked, using her new title with obvious pleasure. "Like I'm living in a fairy tale," Eliza admitted, leaning into his embrace. "This morning I was Miss Eliza Whitmore, spinster of no particular consequence. Tonight I'm the Duchess of Harrington, married to the most wonderful man in England." "You were never of no consequence," Victor said firmly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You were always extraordinary. It just took the right person to recognize it." "And you were that person," Eliza said, turning in his arms to face him. "My rescuer, my champion, my love." "We rescued each other," Victor corrected gently. "You saved me from a life of shallow relationships and meaningless pursuits. You showed me what it means to be truly known and loved." As they made their way inside to begin their wedding night, Eliza reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been society's forgotten woman, resigned to a life of quiet spinsterhood. Now she was beginning a new chapter as wife to a man who loved her completely and unconditionally. Their wedding night was everything she had dreamed it might be, tender, passionate, and filled with the kind of intimacy that comes only from deep emotional connection. In Victor's arms, Eliza discovered that love could indeed bloom at any age, and that the physical expression of that love was every bit as wonderful as the poets claimed. "I love you, my darling wife," Victor whispered as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom windows. "And I love you, my wonderful husband," Eliza replied, marveling at how natural the words felt. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for believing I was worth loving. Thank you for letting me love you," Victor said, holding her close. "Thank you for taking a chance on an impossible dream." As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, both knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had triumphed over society's expectations, age's limitations, and their own fears and doubts. They had proven that it's never too late for love, never too late for happiness, and never too late to begin again. The Duchess, triumphant. The first months of their marriage were a revelation for both Eliza and Victor. At Harrington Hall, away from the scrutiny of London society, they were free to explore their relationship without the pressure of public attention. Eliza threw herself into her new role as Duchess with the same intelligence and compassion she had brought to everything else in her life. "The school in Lower Harrington needs new books," she reported to Victor one morning as they reviewed estate business together in his study. "And I think we should consider establishing a lending library for the tenants' families." "Excellent ideas," Victor agreed, making notes in his ledger. "What about the cottages near the mill? Have you had a chance to inspect them?" "I have, and I'm afraid they need significant repairs," Eliza said, consulting her own carefully kept notes. "The roofs are leaking, and several families are dealing with damp conditions that can't be healthy for the children." "Then we'll have them repaired immediately," Victor said without hesitation. "Draw up a list of what needs to be done, and I'll have the work begun next week." It was conversations like this that reinforced Eliza's growing confidence in her new role. Victor didn't treat her as a decorative addition to his household, but as a true partner in managing their estates and caring for their people. Her suggestions were valued, her observations taken seriously, and her initiatives supported without question. The tenants themselves had been initially uncertain about their new Duchess, a woman of 40 who had arrived without the usual fanfare of youth and beauty. But Eliza's genuine interest in their welfare and her practical approach to problem-solving quickly won their respect and affection. "Her Grace came to see our Mary when she was poorly with the fever," Mrs. Thompson told her neighbor with obvious gratitude. "Brought medicine from her own supplies and sat with the child for hours. Not many ladies of quality would do such a thing." "Aye, and she's got His Grace's ear when it comes to improvements," added Mr. Jenkins, whose cottage had been among the first to receive repairs. "Speaks up for us common folk, she does." Word of Eliza's activities as Duchess gradually filtered back to London, where society was still adjusting to the reality of Victor's unconventional marriage. Reports of her charitable work, her involvement in estate management, and her obvious happiness began to shift public opinion in her favor. "I must admit, I was wrong about the Duchess of Harrington," confessed Lady Pembroke to her circle of friends. "I expected her to be grasping or inappropriate, but by all accounts, she's proving to be exactly what a duchess should be: dignified, charitable, and devoted to her duties." "And the Duke?" asked another lady. "Is he still as besotted as he appeared during their courtship?" "More so, if anything," Lady Pembroke replied. "Lord Ashford saw them at a house party last month and said he'd never seen a couple more obviously in love. The Duke treats her as though she's the most precious thing in the world." Indeed, Victor's devotion to his wife had only deepened with their marriage. He delighted in her intelligence, her compassion, and her growing confidence in her role as Duchess. More than that, he treasured the quiet moments they shared away from public duties. Evenings spent reading together in their private sitting room, morning walks through the gardens, conversations that ranged from estate business to philosophy to their dreams for the future. "I've been thinking about your suggestion that I write about women's experiences," Eliza said one evening as they sat together before the fire. "I've started working on a series of essays about the challenges faced by unmarried women and the need for society to recognize their contributions." "I think that's wonderful," Victor said immediately. "Have you considered approaching a publisher?" "I've been corresponding with Mr. Harrison at Progressive Publications," Eliza admitted. "He's expressed interest in seeing my work, though he warns that it may be controversial." "The best ideas usually are," Victor said with a smile. "I'm proud of you for pursuing this, Eliza. Your voice deserves to be heard." It was support like this that made Eliza realize how profoundly her life had been transformed. Not just her circumstances, but her understanding of her own worth and potential. In Victor's eyes, she saw herself as she truly was, not society's discarded spinster, but a woman of intelligence, character, and value. Their first Christmas as a married couple was spent at Harrington Hall, with Eliza's family joining them for the celebrations. Mrs. Whitmore was in her element, finally able to see her eldest daughter settled and happy, while Charlotte marveled at the transformation in her sister. "You're radiant," Charlotte observed as they decorated the great hall together. "I've never seen you look so alive." "I feel alive," Eliza said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel as though I'm living rather than merely existing." "And Victor? Is he everything you hoped for in a husband?" "More," Eliza said without hesitation. "He's my partner, my champion, my dearest friend. I never knew marriage could be like this, built on respect and shared values as much as love." The highlight of their Christmas celebration was the traditional Boxing Day gathering for their tenants and estate workers. Eliza had thrown herself into the preparations, ensuring that every family received gifts appropriate to their needs and that the feast was both generous and welcoming. "Your Grace," said old Mrs. Patterson, the estate's longest-serving tenant, as she approached Eliza during the festivities, "I wanted to thank you for all you've done for us this year. His Grace chose well when he chose you." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Eliza replied, touched by the genuine warmth in the woman's voice. "I'm honored to be part of this community." "You're not just part of it, Your Grace," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You've made it better. We're all grateful for that." As winter gave way to spring, Eliza and Victor began making plans to return to London for the social season. Eliza approached the prospect with much more confidence than she had felt the previous year, secure now in her position as Victor's wife and in her own worth as a person. "Are you looking forward to London?" Victor asked as they discussed their upcoming departure. "I am, actually," Eliza said with some surprise. "I think I'm ready to face society as the Duchess of Harrington rather than as poor Eliza Whitmore, who somehow managed to catch a duke." "You never caught me," Victor said with a grin, pulling her into his arms. "I caught you, remember? And I'm never letting you go." Their return to London was indeed triumphant. The woman who had once been society's cautionary tale was now one of its most respected figures, and invitations poured in from hostesses eager to secure the presence of the Duke and Duchess of Harrington at their events. "Your Grace," gushed Lady Thornfield at their first social gathering of the season, "how wonderful to see you again. You look absolutely radiant. Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Thank you, Lady Thornfield," Eliza replied graciously, remembering the woman's previous cruelty, but choosing to respond with kindness rather than resentment. "I'm very happy indeed. And your charitable work at Harrington Hall, I've heard such wonderful reports of your activities there." "It's deeply fulfilling," Eliza said. "There's so much that can be accomplished when one has the resources and the will to help others." As the evening progressed, Eliza found herself surrounded by people eager to hear about her work as Duchess, her thoughts on various social issues, and her perspective on the challenges facing their class. It was a far cry from the pitying attention she had once received, and she handled it all with the grace and dignity that had become her hallmark. "You were magnificent tonight," Victor said, as they rode home in their carriage. "Watching you hold court in that drawing room, seeing how people hung on your every word, I was so proud to be your husband." "It's strange," Eliza mused. "A year ago, those same people would have dismissed anything I said as the desperate ramblings of a spinster. Now they treat my opinions as though they have weight and value." "Because they do have weight and value," Victor said firmly. "They always did. The only thing that's changed is that people are finally willing to listen." "No," Eliza said thoughtfully. "What's changed is that I finally believe my opinions are worth hearing. Your love gave me the confidence to value myself, Victor. That's the real transformation." As their carriage pulled up to their London mansion, Eliza reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had gone from being society's forgotten woman to being one of its most influential figures, from believing herself worthless to knowing her own value, from resignation to hope to profound happiness. "Thank you," she said to Victor as he helped her down from the carriage. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me when I was invisible," Eliza said simply. "For loving me when I thought I was unlovable. For showing me that it's never too late to begin again." "Thank you," Victor replied, "for letting me love you, for teaching me what real partnership means, for proving that the best things in life are worth waiting for." As they entered their home together, both knew that their love story was far from over. They had many years ahead of them to continue growing together, to face whatever challenges life might bring, and to prove that love truly could conquer all, including society's narrow expectations and the limitations that age and circumstances might seem to impose. They had found in each other not just love, but purpose, partnership, and the kind of happiness that comes from being truly known and valued. It was a love story that would inspire others for generations to come. Proof that it's never too late for love, never too late for happiness, and never too late to discover that you are worthy of both. The legacy of love. 5 years later, Eliza stood in the library of Harrington Hall, surrounded by the published volumes of her essays on women's rights and social reform. What had begun as private reflections on her own experiences had grown into an influential body of work that was changing how society viewed unmarried women and their potential contributions. The Times review is quite favorable, Victor said, entering the library with the morning papers. They're calling your latest collection a powerful voice for social progress and essential reading for anyone concerned with justice and equality. I still can hardly believe it, Eliza said, running her fingers along the spine of her newest book. 5 years ago, I thought my life was essentially over. Now I'm a published author with readers across England and beyond. You're much more than that, Victor said, moving to embrace her from behind. You're my beloved wife, the heart of our community, and a woman who has touched countless lives with her compassion and wisdom. At 45, Eliza had grown even more beautiful in Victor's eyes. The confidence and purpose she had found in their marriage had given her a radiance that no amount of youth could match, and her influence extended far beyond their estate to the broader world of social reform. Lady Morrison is coming to tea this afternoon, Eliza mentioned, referring to a young widow who had become one of her protégés. She's finally decided to pursue her interest in medicine, despite her family's objections. Another life transformed by your example, Victor observed with pride. How many women have you encouraged to pursue their dreams despite society's expectations? It's not about me, Eliza said modestly. It's about showing them that they have choices, that their worth isn't determined by their marital status or their age. But it started with you, Victor insisted, with your courage to believe you deserved love and happiness even when the world told you otherwise. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their guests, a steady stream of visitors who came to Harrington Hall seeking Eliza's advice, support, or simply the inspiration of her example. Young women facing pressure to marry unsuitable men, older women struggling with widowhood or spinsterhood, reformers seeking allies in their causes, all found a welcome at the Duchess's table. Your Grace, said Miss Jennifer Hartwell, a 28-year-old woman who had refused 3 proposals in favor of pursuing her education, I wanted to thank you for your letter of introduction to the Royal Institution. They've accepted my application to attend their lecture series. I'm delighted to hear it, Eliza replied warmly. Education is never wasted, regardless of one's circumstances. My mother thinks I'm ruining my chances of marriage, Miss Hartwell confided. She says no man wants a wife who knows more than he does. Then those men aren't worthy of you, Eliza said firmly. The right man will value your intelligence and education, not feel threatened by it. Trust me, I speak from experience. As the afternoon progressed, Eliza found herself thinking about the ripple effects of her own transformation. By refusing to accept society's verdict on her worth, by daring to believe she deserved love and happiness, she had inadvertently become a beacon of hope for other women facing similar challenges. You've started a revolution, Victor observed that evening, as they reflected on the day's conversations. A quiet revolution, perhaps, but a revolution nonetheless. All I did was refuse to disappear, Eliza said. I refused to accept that my life was over simply because I hadn't married by 25. And in doing so, you've shown countless other women that they have the same choice, Victor said. That's the power of example, my darling. Your courage has given others permission to be courageous too. As they prepared for bed in their comfortable chambers, Eliza reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. She had found love when she least expected it, purpose when she thought her useful years were behind her, and influence when she had accepted invisibility. Do you ever regret it? She asked Victor as they settled into bed together. Choosing me over all those young beauties who would have given you children and a more conventional marriage. Never, Victor said without hesitation, pulling her close. You've given me something far more valuable than children or convention. You've given me a true partnership, a love that grows stronger every day, and the joy of watching you become everything you were meant to be. I love you, Eliza whispered, the words as meaningful now as they had been on their wedding day. And I love you, Victor replied, my extraordinary wife, my perfect partner, my greatest blessing. As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, both knew that their love story had become something larger than themselves. It had become proof that love could bloom at any age, that worth wasn't determined by youth or conventional beauty, and that the most profound happiness often came to those who had the courage to wait for something real. Their marriage had not only transformed their own lives, but had become an inspiration to others, showing that it was never too late to find love, never too late to pursue dreams, and never too late to discover that you were worthy of all the happiness life had to offer. In the years that followed, their love story would be told and retold, inspiring countless others to believe in the possibility of love beyond society's narrow expectations. They had proven that true love sees past surface appearances to the soul beneath, that the best partnerships are built on respect and shared values, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin not with passion, but with recognition. The recognition of kindred spirits finding each other across the crowded rooms of life. Eliza and Victor's love story reminds us that it's never too late for love, never too late for happiness, and never too late to discover your own worth. Their journey proves that true love sees beyond age, beyond society's expectations, and beyond our own fears and doubts, to the beautiful soul within. May their story inspire you to believe in your own worth, to remain open to love's possibilities, and to never let others define your value. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not in youth, but in wisdom, not in desperation, but in dignity, and not in conformity, but in the courage to be authentically yourself. Subscribe for more captivating historical romances that prove love conquers all. From second chances to unexpected matches, discover stories that celebrate love in all its forms. Comment: what touched you most about Eliza and Victor's journey? Your next favorite romance awaits.